Mr. Speaker, why didn't the Prime Minister sack the former Health Secretary on Friday morning?
Mr. Speaker, I read the story in common with you and everybody else on Friday, and we had a new Health Secretary in place by Saturday, Mr. Speaker, which I think, given that we have a pandemic, I think to move from one Health Secretary to the next with that speed was fast, Mr. Speaker, but it wasn't as fast as the vaccine rollout, Mr. Speaker, which is now going so fast that we've done in this week half of the under 30s, Mr. Speaker, have now had their first jab, and that is speed.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, what a ridiculous answer. The Prime Minister must have been the only person in the country who looked at that photo on Friday morning and thought that the Health Secretary shouldn't be sacked immediately. On Friday, the Prime Minister's spokesperson said, quote, "The Prime Minister considers the matter closed." Minister after minister were then sent out to defend the indefensible. It was briefed that the Prime Minister was quite happy for the Health Secretary to stay in his post. So, can the Prime Minister clarify, now he's got the chance, did he sack the Health Secretary or at any point ask him to resign? Yes or no?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Gentleman will notice that the Health Secretary has changed in the last 5 days. He complains about the speed with which that happened. This government moved at positively lightning speed by comparison to the Right Honourable Gentleman opposite, who spent 3 days trying and failing to sack his deputy leader, Mr. Speaker, who he then promoted, Mr. Speaker. He fires and rehires.
Mr. Speaker, the Deputy Leader is sitting beside me. The former Health Secretary has done a runner. Mr. Speaker, on Friday, the Prime Minister said the case was closed. Then on Monday, he tried to take the credit for the Health Secretary's resigning. In a minute, he'll be telling us he scored the winner last night. But let me press the Prime Minister a bit more on this. The person the Health Secretary was in a relationship with was his non-executive director. Let me remind the House, according to the government's own guidance, one of the roles of a non-executive director is to challenge the Secretary of State and the department, to challenge them. And they receive taxpayers' money for doing so. So from the offset, it was blindingly obvious that there was a conflict of interest here and a whole host of unanswered questions. Why on earth did the Prime Minister judge that this matter was closed on Friday morning?
Mr. Speaker, I hesitate to accuse the Right Honourable Gentleman of repeating his question. I observe that the non-executive director in question is also no longer with the department. And what the continuity, Mr. Speaker, is that department is getting on with the fastest vaccine rollout of any European country. And I'm proud to tell this House that this week, I'll tell you what's happened just in the last few days. This country has actually overtaken Israel in the proportion of people we have vaccinated, Mr. Speaker. And I think he might pay tribute to the Health Department for that achievement.
Yes, Starmer.
So, Mr. Speaker, let me get this right. The Prime Minister was happy to keep a Health Secretary in place during the pandemic who he not only thought was absolutely hopeless, but he also knew had broken the rules and was in a relationship with somebody he was employing at taxpayers' expense. It doesn't sound like case closed to me. And I know the Prime Minister is keen to sweep this under the carpet. But let me tell the Prime Minister why this matters. Millions of people made huge and very difficult sacrifices to follow the rules that his Health Secretary had introduced. Prime Minister, take the case of Ollie Beebe. I'm sorry, you might want to listen. Ollie died of leukemia on the 5th of May, the day before the photo of the former Health Secretary was taken. Ollie died, like so many other people in this pandemic, with his family and friends unable to spend time with him. When he was in hospital, he begged to see his family. But following the rules, only one member of his family was allowed to see him. His mum said, "I'm livid. We did everything we were told to do. And the man who made the rules didn't. How can that be right? So I asked the Prime Minister again, how could he possibly think this matter was closed on Friday morning?
Mr. Speaker, we all share the grief and the pain of Ollie and his family and millions of people up and down the country who have endured the privations that this country has been through in order to get the coronavirus pandemic under control. And that is why we had a change of Health Secretary the day after the story appeared, Mr. Speaker. And that is why, actually, what we are doing as a government, instead of focusing on stuff going on within the Westminster bubble, we are focusing on rolling out that vaccine, those vaccines at a rate that will make sure that people like Ollie and his family do not have to suffer in the future. And I'm proud to say, as a result of the efforts made by the NHS, by the Department of Health, by July the 19th, we will have vaccinated everybody. Every adult over 18 will have received 1 jab, and everybody over 40 will have received 2 jabs, Mr. Speaker. That is the priority of this government, and quite right too.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I can hardly think that the Prime Minister thinks it's appropriate in response to a question about Ollie to suggest that this is, in his words, the Westminster bubble. The Westminster bubble in answer to that question, Prime Minister? Before Prime Minister's questions this morning, I spoke to Ollie's mum about the awful circumstances that she and her family have been through. She told me, Prime Minister, that every day she watched the press conferences, every day they were on, and she hung on to every word that government ministers said, so that she would know what her family could and couldn't do. Yeah. And then they followed the rules. Yeah. This is not the Westminster bubble. Yeah. She told me that for her and her family, this case isn't closed. Yeah. And she speaks for millions of people. Yeah. Ask the Prime Minister to withdraw that when he gets up. Yeah. Withdraw that when he gets up. It's the wrong response to Ollie's case. I can't help concluding that the Prime Minister didn't ask relevant questions on Friday morning, either because he didn't want to know the answers, or because he knows full well there's more to come out. Yes. Well, then, he says nonsense. So I asked the Prime Minister, in response to his muttered nonsense, when he declared the case closed on Friday morning, had he asked the Health Secretary if he'd broken any other rules? Yes or no?
Mr. Speaker, let me be absolutely clear with the right honourable gentleman, and I think the whole House and the whole country can see that we have a new Health Secretary in place, and have had one since the day after the stories appeared, and that was entirely right, and that was the right response to the situation. And he is, of course, he's right in what he says about the sacrifice made by families up and down the land. But the best response, in my view, to their grief and their pain and the sufferings that they have endured is to get on with a new Health Secretary, which is what we have, and with all the energy and application that we have, to roll out those vaccines and allow the people of this country to work forwards towards Freedom Day, which I devoutly hope will come on July the 19th. And never let it be forgotten, Mr. Speaker, that if we'd followed the advice of the right honourable gentleman, that would not be possible, because it was under his proposals that we would have stayed in the European Medicines Agency and been unable to deliver the vaccine rollout at all.
Yes, Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I really think that having failed to sack the former Health Secretary, he really is trying to take credit now for the fact that we've got a new Health Secretary. So, Mr. Speaker, well, he wouldn't be there if the Prime Minister had his way. The matter was closed. So, Mr. Speaker, it's no questions asked by the Prime Minister on Friday and no questions answered today. Yeah. There's a pattern here. Yeah. When Dominic Cummings broke the rules by driving to Barnard Castle, the Prime Minister backed him. Yeah. When the Housing Secretary unlawfully approved a £1 billion property deal for a Tory donor, the Prime Minister backed him. When the Home Secretary broke the Ministerial Code, the Prime Minister backed her. And when the Health Secretary broke COVID rules, the Prime Minister tried and wanted to back him too. Every time it's the same old story. Isn't it the case, Mr. Speaker, that while the British people are doing everything asked of them, it's one rule for them and another rule for everybody else?
Mr. Speaker, there was a new Health Secretary the following day, Mr. Speaker, and the whole country can see that, and we are getting on we are getting on with our agenda of vaccinating the population of this country through the energy and application of the new Secretary of State for Health and the Department of Health. And I thank them and I congratulate them. And it's as a result of that vaccine rollout, Mr. Speaker, which, as I say, would have been impeded, fatally impeded, had we followed the policies of the party opposite. That we're able now we have a higher wall of vaccination than virtually any other country in the world, and we are able to proceed with our cautious but we hope irreversible unlocking of the UK economy, with the result, Mr. Speaker, that growth is up to levels we haven't seen since last July. Jobs are up, and he calls for us to act faster in removing cabinet ministers, Mr. Speaker. It took him 3 days, as I say, to give her three new jobs. Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, a Shadow Secretary of State for the Future of Work. We create jobs, Mr. Speaker. He creates non-jobs. He dithers, we deliver.